Hi everybody, welcome to today's AOP Live webinar. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. If you've never been to an AOP Live webinar before, we have a slightly different format from a typical webinar. It's really all about your questions. There are no slides. Well, we have one answer slide from a poll that we did earlier. We're going to share that with you, but the conversation isn't driven by a slide deck. I want to thank you in advance to everybody who's submitted a question. We asked you as you went through the registration process to ask any questions that you may find and they may want our panel to answer to you today. We also want to invite you to ask questions throughout today's AOP Live. You should see in the box underneath where you're watching this video, there is a place for you to submit those questions. My colleague Kelly Barn, who is off camera right now but is working away in the background, is going to be keeping an eye on any questions as they do come in and then sharing them. I'll bring them on screen and pose them to our panel. So just a reminder to ask any questions, you can do that by using the box underneath this video. Now, today's topic is how to supercharge your digital procurement strategy. It's a topic that's, I think, of particular interest for procurement leaders and professionals right now, as we're looking at how do we take advantage of all the technology that is really becoming available to us. There's been an explosion in procurement tech, but how do we fit that into our overall strategy? And we have an all-star panel to discuss this with today. We'll be joined by Alpar Kamber. Alpar is the EVP and Business Unit Leader of WNS Denali. He was the founder and CEO of WNS Denali Sourcing Services, which is now a part of WNS. And prior to WNS Denali, Alpar sparked his passion for procurement and built cross-industry expertise while in management positions at Ariba, Free Markets, and E&Y. We'll be joined by Julia Brignac, the EVP of Global Growth and Client Success. And prior to WNS Denali, Julia held leadership positions at DuPont, Honeywell, Accenture, Newell Brands, Vantage Partners, and Brambles. And as a former CPO herself, Julia leads with more than 25 years of experience across management consultancy, across being a practitioner, and also as an entrepreneur. And we'll be joined by Chris Eyerman. Chris is Head of Digital Innovation at WNS Denali. Chris has over 20 years of experience collaborating with clients to improve their procurement programs, change how they leverage procurement through category management, source to contract, and procurement transformation programs. Chris is also a real-life rocket scientist. So if you've got any questions about rockets and rocket science, then Chris is definitely the man for those as we go through the conversation. So with that being said, let's go into our conversation. So welcome, Julie, Chris, to today's AOP Live. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to the stage for today's discussion.
Thanks, Phil. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Now, we always start by asking the question, did you find procurement or did procurement find you? Now, I know that there's three of you to answer that question, so we probably don't want to go into a lot of detail because I'm sure we could talk about our origin stories for the entire hour, but I would like to pose that question. And Julie, I want to come to you first and ask you, how did you find yourself in procurement?
So procurement did find me, and it was during my career, early in my career at DuPont. And so I was in a finance field program actually for engineers. And so did rotational assignments every 18 to 24 months. And one of my assignments happened to be in procurement and supply chain. And from there on out, I've been in the field ever since.
So you never left once you took that procurement supply chain rotation, you
That's
stuck
right.
with it.
That's
That's
right.
actually my story too. I had the same and in a rotation program and then never left. So certainly see the appeal. Chris, how about you? How did a rocket scientist get into procurement?
Well, you've already pointed out that I started my career in aerospace and building satellites. And after I got an MBA, I did kind of come across an innovative company called Free Markets in our space. And that's really how I came across procurement and didn't look back since then.
Alpar, I'll pose the same question last but not least. How you find yourself in this world?
Well, a while ago, I've heard a saying that, being at procurement is having breakfast at Denny's at 2 a.m. in the morning. You don't plan to be there, you end up there. Even though, I think all of us kind of share a similar path to getting into procurement. That has changed significantly over the years. That, I think truly a very innovative, valuable function. And a lot of new talent and young generation want to be part of this transformation journey. for me, it's pretty similar to Chris, actually, and I have met at free markets. So I came to the US for my business school. And then as soon as I landed at Pittsburgh Airport, I saw, these billboards showing how free market saved X% to such and such company. And you can see the cost coming down, leveraging internet, which was up and coming back in the day. So it's really a digital path into procurement, and which has been an exciting journey so far.
Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about your background. I always ask that question for a little bit of context as we go into some of the conversation that we have planned for today. Now, I want to actually start by sharing you the results of a poll question. So we asked a poll question to the Art of Procurement community just on LinkedIn as a kind of run up to today's webinar, where the question was, what is the most important input to digital procurement transformation? And here is, we gave 4 potential answers. Here is how the answers shaped up. So the most important input to digital procurement transformation based on the poll results, number 1 was alignment with the business. Number 2 was driving a vision or a roadmap. Number 3 was making sure that we have the talent qualified to execute. And the last one, with only 3% of the vote, was you need to have plenty of budget to make sure that you succeed. Alpar, I'm going to throw this to you first. What are some of your responses or reactions when you see those poll results?
I'm on the 36% camp. I think driving a vision and having a vision first before digital is really, really important, because I've seen a lot of companies leading with digital and then trying to figure out what the vision is. But I think it needs to be the other way around, where you have to have a vision first and have a strategy, and then complement that strategy, enabling with digital. The lines of business alignment actually is very important for procurement. Definitely. It's probably more important than digital or anything else. But I don't think that is at the heart of digital transformation. I still believe, as procurement leaders and CPOs, we and you need to define what your procurement strategy is, and then arrive at your digital transformation roadmap. And then you'll bring along the business along with you in terms of removing friction from that.
Julie, any thoughts to build on top of that?
Yes, actually, I think that I agree with Alpar, actually, and it actually brings to mind that there's a saying, probably a bit overused, but it's still true, that digital or tools, they don't fix a process. You have to have a process, and then the digital tools that mirror those. And so I think that really aligns with what Alpar said in terms of having the vision and the roadmap. Having said that, I actually think that plenty of budget actually aligns pretty well with alignment with the business. So it's funny that they are first and last where that's concerned. Because if, you have to have plenty of budget and the alignment with the business, right? You want the buy-in, you need, your leadership to be able to support the funding around that. And so I think really, it'd be interesting to hear people's thoughts around when they say alignment with the business, because Alpar's right. The tools really do help us in procurement to do our job well, to serve our stakeholders. And so, but you have to have that support and the backing from the leadership, which includes the funding. So interesting that where they came in the poll.
Yeah, Chris, any immediate reaction from you?
Yeah, just to add on that, I think certainly I wouldn't start any digital initiative without a clear vision. And that obviously needs to come from the business and what the mission of procurement is overall. You mentioned my spacecraft days, and it would be ridiculous to even embark in any kind of space mission if you don't have a clear picture of what your objective is. Why are we going there in the first place? And unfortunately, that's an area in procurement that maybe isn't as clear as it needs to be. But that said, I would say, that's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. And I know we'll talk more about the ecosystem and all the other elements, not just what is on here, but other aspects that are also critical if you're really going to drive adoption, because we've seen in the notes, we've seen in the feedback from the audience already, adoption is pretty low, 30% or less for digital initiatives. So right. I know we'll dive more into that topic.
Yeah, and it's interesting thinking, why would alignment with the business come up on top of that? I think that it's probably just that, we don't want to operate in a silo. So, making sure that we're not kind of forging our own path around technology without really the consideration of what the business needs, so that we're not building something that ultimately won't be used. But I agree that you really need that vision and roadmap to get the business to buy into in the first place. before you start on that journey. So let me come to the first question that I wanted to ask you, Alpar, as we start to go into the conversation. Now, we've talked, or we will be talking throughout the conversation a lot about this idea of a digital ecosystem. And as we do that, I thought it would be valuable to just give some context of what you mean when we do talk about digital ecosystems.
So great question. So let me set the stage, because I think everything we'll talk about from there on is going to point back to the ecosystem. And it's actually the ecosystem without digital, and then the role of digital in enabling the ecosystem and make sure it's functioning in a very healthy way. And, this has been years in the working, right? If you think about procurement, the evolution of procurement, we've always kind of focused on what's important, what's a priority in procurement. At one time it was, getting vendors paid on time. Then it was, resolving payment issues, which then we got to issue the right POs in the right context, and making sure it kind of follows through. Then it became, strategic sourcing is creating really valuable, context within your organization's vision and your organization's and lines of business objectives, and how does strategic procurement and sourcing helps identify the best suppliers in that spectrum, and making sure the suppliers are in a position to enable the organization's corporate mission and meeting its objectives. So again, going back, it's always been one thing at a time. And what we've realized over time is actually it's not just one thing, it's a system of many, right? When you think about the procurement ecosystem, there are many players. Certainly you have the line of business, which we've heard is the most important thing, which they are there to drive a specific, corporate mission and objective and deliver against that. So it starts with understanding their objectives and what do they want from procurement, how can procurement enable that? But that's only one element, one player of the ecosystem. Then you have the suppliers, equally important, right? They're a key part of the ecosystem in creating value out of procurement. So you got stakeholders, you got suppliers, and you got your finance organization who's looking at from an overall financial, commercial perspective. Then you got legal, who's looking at things from a risk and compliance perspective. So there are really various players, and then procurement in its own needs to connect the dots. Of these different players, using data, using digital, using process, using expertise, both internal and external knowledge and expertise in making that happen. So that's why over the last 3-4 years, we started to think about the entire ecosystem and how do they become working well with each other, off of each other, creating value. It's not really one thing at a time, but it's looking at the whole system.
It's like this engine that all these components of the gears within the engine that all connect together. And it's interesting you talk about it being really everyone who interacts with procurement or has a reason to be involved in procurement, not necessarily, as we talk, I think, broader about ecosystems, sometimes there's this thought that ecosystem just means technology, just means this, a collection of different technologies, but it's actually way beyond that in terms, and technology is just one part of that.
Absolutely.
Now, you talked about maturity, and Julie, I want to ask you this question, because you obviously, in your role, are helping an awful lot of companies on their procurement transformation journey and building this ecosystem. Where do you typically say that most organizations are today that you work with on their digital transformation journey?
Yeah, that is a great question, because I think the answer changes, right? And it changes with the changing business requirements, right? As you mentioned in the introduction, I've been in this business a very long time. And so you see cycles in procurement, and you see things come back around that you saw many years ago, but in a different form. Yeah. And so with that, I think that changes the level of maturity, and that grows, of course, with the new technology or the digital options that companies have. So to answer your question specifically, it's really varied in terms of what we see in terms of the maturity of where it is. But it's also interesting to see where companies who believe that they've been through some kind of maturity path and have gone through a transformation it's not that they start over, but you continue to build on that. So then you ask yourself, well, are we ever finished with that, especially in the function that we work in? And I think the answer.
Oh, I think we lost Julie. Alpar, are you still there?
I think what she's trying to say is, and I think we share the same vision, is there's still a long way to go when it comes to digital procurement transformation, right? There's, in my opinion, and I think I want to hear from Chris and Julie as well, but in my opinion, we're still at the very start of it. There's a lot of options around us, but truly applying the technology to drive truly a transformative experience for the players of the ecosystem, which is the stakeholders, which is the supplier, your finance organization, your legal. So that's still yet to come, in my opinion. So we're definitely in it for a good, exciting ride. There's lots of available options out there, but I think we're just beginning, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I'll add on to that and say, I would say broadly, probably when you think about overall procurement organization maturity versus the digital maturity component of that, I would say the digital maturity component on average is probably 1 to 2 notches below overall procurement level maturity. And I think maturity models are a really helpful tool. We use those across the organization. We built those for our digital capabilities. It's a helpful tool, not to score people or not to say that, when am I going to reach the end of my journey? Because I don't know that there is an end of the journey. Right. When people progress, then we'll just kind of add another dimensions to the maturity spectrum. But a really good tool to look candidly at where are we today, and then use that as a mechanism to help feed our transformation programs and digital roadmaps, taking into account the ecosystem, taking into account where we are today, and then the specific areas that we need to focus.
Should, and I'm open to anybody kind of responding to this, should we be thinking about this as transformation? Because we always put the label of transformation when we drive change in procurement. But really, as we've all said, it's really continuous improvement. So, should we be thinking as the way that we talk about this is not being, we're going to transform from broken to fixed, but more it's a continued evolution of our capabilities that doesn't really have, it's not a linear start and the end. It's like a flywheel that just keeps getting stronger.
Yeah, no question. And, because there's tremendous value to be had at every stage of the spectrum. When we work with some very mature procurement organizations, but also very, very low mature procurement organizations. There's a U.S. health insurance provider that we're working with, relatively low, mostly manual procurement function. And we're helping them to just kind of get the foundations of good process, core systems, strategic category management at the very early stages. But technology was an important part of that, and helping them, not just with the selection of those platforms, but implementing some key areas, again, that align back up to their mission and their vision, which is most important. In that case, for example, there was a key barrier to the way the stakeholders interacted with procurement. And it may have seemed early to kind of implement a digital assistant or chatbot, but that was exactly the right thing that they needed to help, reduce the friction for how the business engaged with procurement, and fix that perception to then enable the next stages of the transformation.
So I have a question that's coming from Jennifer. I'm going to ask this to you, Julie. And I'm not sure if this is a loaded question or not. Is it possible for us to determine our own maturity as a procurement organization, or do we need to assess it formally to have an accurate sense of where we are?
I think it is a great idea. I think you need to assess it, because you really need to have that point of view, because you want to look at what other organizations are doing. And if you don't have that different point of view and be able to bring that together and say, well, where are we? But more importantly, where do we want to go with this? I think that assessment is absolutely critical. And we do that with a lot of our clients. And what's interesting too, if you assess your maturity, you typically think that you're more mature than what you really are. And
right.
So, and that's fine. There's really nothing, terribly wrong with that, but you have to know where you must start from to be able to build that roadmap and be able to understand how fast you want to get where you want to go, and then how efficient it'll be.
Do you find as an external partner that it's easier for you to get to that sense of where they are faster than if an organization tries to do that on their own?
Well, I believe we do, because obviously we work with a broad spectrum of clients. And so we see that, and we see it every day. We're working with them every day, and we're actually involved in their maturity. I mean, that's really what we do from a partnering standpoint. I mean, we provide our services and we bring points of view to our clients, but we also see where they are, and we can compare across that, and to be able to share that and share the learnings, because we're always learning as well, which is a perspective. So you learn with your clients, you learn through the journey that they're going through and helping drive their maturity. And that really contributes very, very clearly and very distinctly to the partnership.
Now, we had a question that came in advance as part of the registration process from Mark. Chris, I'll ask this one to you. How do technology decisions, or decisions around your technology stack, how do they affect procurement strategy?
Well, directly. If you believe that what Alpar just got done describing in terms of the ecosystem and the importance of the connectedness and how those dots are connected, then of course technology decisions impact that strategy. And ideally, we're doing that in the other direction, that we're driving the technology decisions, based on what our mission is as a procurement organization, and directing what the steps are in those technology decisions. We know that that's not always the case, and there are external systems, ERP systems, for example, that cut across organizational areas and then will impact procurement. But it's definitely influenced to the procurement strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, when you think about building a digital roadmap, it has to take into account not just what's going on within procurement, but all of the other systems that might be impacted across the organization and all the other ecosystem players, to help get that visibility and to be proactive in that situation.
Yeah, and I think, to add to that, definitely, I think we all need to start from a point of the ecosystem has a lot of noise and has a lot of friction, and digital is really a good enabler of removing that friction, removing that noise, and creating clarity and transparency and a seamless flow of data for the right fit for purpose to get the work done. I think that's really the ultimate place that we want to take procurement to, and that's why I say we still have a good ways to go, because there's still limitations that when it comes to the technology may be available. It's just that's why ecosystem is not digital. Ecosystem is people. Mm-hmm. Ecosystem is process, and then digital will need to put the two together, and bring the information at your fingertips so you can do great decision making, and in an efficient manner. So that's really the ultimate goal of you have a strategy, and the digital is really there to help enable that and get there faster.
And so we had a question from Sahib, who kind of connects what you were saying there with maturity. So the question is, how does a procurement team's digital strategy connect to their relative maturity? Or how does perhaps the digital strategy change as an organization gets more mature? And any advice you might have there?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that.
Yeah,
go ahead, Alpar. Yeah, as we pointed out, the digital component is one aspect of the overall procurement organization. But I think when you look at the different stages of digital maturity in the organization, there's different focus areas. So if you're in a very low maturity state, you're really talking about what are the prerequisites to getting ready for digital transformation. That's looking after your ecosystem, making sure you've got a good vision, those components. As that's in place, now let's look at where can we start building the right foundation for digital transformation. So again, these are areas like making sure your core processes are in place, that they're defined, that they're leaned out, starting to get in place your, what I would call the core platforms, your core source to contract or procure to pay platforms that are carrying kind of the bulk of that procurement process from a volume standpoint. Your data maturity, getting a landscape and understanding of the entire scope of data. In this case, I mean, not just internal data being spent and contract and supplier data, but your internal procurement knowledge and the assets that sit in people's heads and on desktops, and also in the external marketplace from market intelligence. Mm-hmm. So starting to get a handle and a mapping of of how can you understand where your maturity is today and your operating model. So starting to get in place if you're trying to transform to strategic. So those are kind of foundational components. And then I would say the next level, what we see is, coming back to Alpar's point about connecting the dots. Once you're past the foundation, we see it really comes down to now how do we better connect the dots across the organization? And I would maybe characterize that in 3 areas. First is the data, as I already described, is really connecting, well, it's the data, the knowledge, and the market intelligence, harnessing it, cleansing it, making good high quality data, driving insights from that and getting that to the right people in the ecosystem. The second area is how do we connect the dots across the procurement operating model and making that operating model from strategic to tactical, from stakeholders in through strategic to tactical, more frictionless and automated. And then the third area is connecting the dots for the strategic category manager. And that's okay. Obviously, that's a key role for the organization. If you're going to drive to strategic procurement, that role has their hands in all of that data, that operating model, and ensuring their strategy through execution is enabled. So just kind of broadly, those are maybe kind of 3 broad phases that I would describe in that maturity spectrum.
Yeah, and I think I just want to finish off with that. Going back to your original question, procurement maturity and digital, hopefully they're aligned, right? Digital maturity and procurement maturity, hopefully they're aligned. I've seen a lot of companies who start here and they try to jump to the gun in terms of driving a very, adventurous digital strategy without having the right maturity, and it fails. Mm-hmm. They start over again, and then it fails. They start over. So that's why it goes back to, make sure they're aligned and it aligns with your strategy and your level of maturity, and you can take advantage of it and make it stick. I think it's very important.
There's actually a great question that came in related to maturity as well from Amy. How do we ensure that transformation or maturity journey doesn't allow procurement to become, we're so focused on ourselves, so self-focused that we fall out of alignment with the rest of the organization? So perhaps, Julie, I can pose this to you. How do you make sure that, I think from both a transformation perspective, but also, we're talking today about supercharging digital strategy. How do we make sure that we don't start off at the right place, but then end up, going in 2 different directions?
Yeah, it's very easy sometimes. I think Alpar mentioned, or Phil, you did, around running the risk of being siloed. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what this has to do with. And part of the ecosystem that we haven't talked about a lot is around influencing, right? Yeah. And the influencers in terms of, and that's what we are in procurement. And so I think if we think of ourselves about the influencers and connecting those dots, like we've said, then that really forces the interaction with the stakeholders. It makes sure that we're hearing the needs of the business and that we're catering to the business, and make sure that we continually have that seat at the table. We talk a lot about that in procurement, and we hear our clients actually say that in terms of where their level of maturity is. Well, we think we need to have a seat at the table. How do we do that? How do we enable that? And so to me, if you think about it in those terms, and you think about it actually the broader sense, and think of procurement as the ecosystem, and then that drives your maturity. It's almost like taking the steps and defining, like I said before, where you need to go. Yep. And so you're not going to really fall. I think you minimize the risk of falling out of alignment with the rest of the org, because there are clients, we're serving them, we're influencing them, but they're also depending on us as procurement to be able to deliver, right, in terms and service the business. So I think if it's the mindset, right, mm-hmm. to make sure, and then your actions accordingly, so that you stay aligned with your stakeholders and you don't silo yourself, if you will.
How much of a formal governance program do you recommend to make sure that you have kind of the checks and balances in place?
Yeah, we are very, very strong where the governance is concerned in terms of working with our clients. In fact, we really insist on it, and we insist on actually a 3-part, right? You can think about it as at the very strategic level, and then at the what I'll call leadership level, and then the operational level. And all of those are important in terms of coming together, because again, you make sure that those connections happen. You hear what the client needs, what they say. And also, if you're connecting at every level operationally, I mean, that's that's what we do, right? And running a program in terms of delivering the services, that's important to stay connected. But you don't always know how things are moving up and down the chain, the communications. And so that's really critical to make sure that we have those, not only the governance, but also the 3-tiered governance, to be able to connect all of that and to continue, because that's what drives the maturity, to be able to respond to the needs of the business and the changing requirements that our clients often have.
Yeah, and I think, what Julie's saying is you cannot overdo it, right? I think governance is how you communicate, governance, how you align, how you're on the same page, and then it's a constant, loop that keeps feeding each other. So you can't just do it. I'm going to do it every 6 months, or I'm going to do it once a year, get in front of my stakeholders and understand what they're doing, and then go back to my, procurement desk, and I'm going to do the work and then deliver it to them. I think it just needs to be a constant engagement where, again, it's part of the whole ecosystem. The data needs to flow, the objectives needs to be aligned, the information needs to be made available, and it needs to align. I think that's how you don't create things in silos or, follow a path that doesn't align with what the business wants to do, which then it can be very, very detrimental to the value that you're creating.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage anybody, if you are listening to this conversation, you have questions to ask, please feel free to pop them in the chat box underneath this video, and we will bring as many of those questions into the conversation as we possibly can. Now, we talked about, of course, the use of digital in building our maturity from a procurement perspective. There's a really interesting question, but Chris, I want to pose this to you. How has the rise of best of breed digital ecosystems and the concept around best of breed changed what it means to digitally transform? We've kind of gone from this world of suites, which actually I know both you, Chris, and Alpar were kind of from that world at the beginning of digitization of procurement, to where there's a lot more options available. Has that changed what organizations can do when it comes to their digital transformation journey?
Yeah, it sure has. And, that pendulum has definitely swung, towards more best of breed. Although I would say, this notion of a true end-to-end platform was always probably more a misnomer than reality. Yes, when you think about the core platform, source to contract, procure to pay, and there are very good platforms there. Don't get me wrong; those are critical enablers, critical foundations. But there have always been gaps, right? Whether it's analytics, whether it's other information to pull together, whether it's an end-to-end provider maybe not having as strong a capability. But that pendulum has definitely swung. And I think there's some key factors that have gone into that. One is, I think, the proliferation of the technologies involved, with AI, with integration technologies that make it a lot easier to connect across systems. So any point solution provider out there is going to have good capabilities. Most platforms and technologies today have APIs that can be accessed to connect and integrate, and that's different than it was in the past. Plus the proliferation of just best of breed point solutions that are going at really the next level. If you dial back 20 years, it was about source to contract, procure to pay. Yes, some other components, supplier management, analytics, but today the level of refinement on where the startups are focused is getting to that next level of granularity, whether it's additional layers of analytics, it's other players that are taking a new tack at going after specialized AI approaches to bidding, whether it's sustainability focused, or whether it's players like even Tealbook and Scalpy that are really focusing on data as a separate element from the systems itself. Really different concepts than we focused on in the past. There's really a lot of different directions and a lot of refinement in terms of where these best of breed solutions are coming from today.
So that brings in a lot of complexity. And actually, there's a question that's just come in from Cherie saying, if we're trying to build, and I don't think there's a single answer, so I'll start by kind of positioning that, because it does depend on where you are on the maturity curve. Alpar, maybe I'll ask you this just for some initial kind of thoughts. If we're trying to build a roadmap for a best of breed digital ecosystem, how do we decide where to start and in what order to add these point solutions?
Yeah, I think I want to start by saying point solutions is not always the right answer. Okay, I think Chris alluded to that as well. It's all about fit for purpose. When we talk about producing the data and removing, the friction. I think, for a process that touches a lot of the players of the ecosystem, you do want to have a common platform, right? So when it comes to procure to pay, you need to have one core platform that runs it, it's clean, and it produces good quality of data that you can then make use of it and make other decisions and information on it. When it comes to sourcing, less so. I think you can have a standalone best of breed sourcing solution because it's not really connected to anything else. It's really a project-based, platform that has a beginning as an end, produces a lot of data, which then you need to feed off to a best of breed solution who can read data from your multiple sources of, platforms, and then feeds it to category managers so they can know what's going on at upstream, meaning how do my supplier decisions get made versus how do those decisions get implemented at the bottom line of, when you're actually buying and spending the money with them, or when you're performance managing them and creating value through a different ways of form, right? So I think it's not one or the other. You definitely need core platforms that talk to each other, that remove the friction and simplifies the process. And then you also need best of breed solutions who can, complement what exists and enriches that experience for the end user and for the players of the ecosystem. So I don't think there's, a starting point would be ask your stakeholders, ask your, your procurement stakeholders and see where the pain point is. I think you want to solve the pain points first. If you don't do that, then it's very difficult for you to do anything else with it, right? I think that's why that drives your agenda, your priorities.
All right, thank you. And I want to come in a moment to some questions around aligning our journey with the business. But I do have one more question. Julie, I'm going to ask this one to you. This came from Vivian in advance of the webinar. Vivian's question was, which skills-based or educational components of digital procurement require more focus and investment?
Yeah, that's as far as a skill set. So I'm going to assume it's the skill set of, the procurement practitioners.
Yeah,
right?
and related to their ability to maximize the value of these new technologies that are available to us. Right.
Well, I think that our core skill sets as procurement practitioners, right, is what's necessary. I don't know that I'm of the opinion that you need extra or incremental skill sets to be able to operate within it, because again, what digital tools and digital enablers do is they make our job easier. They give us data faster. They again provide us with information to be able to service the business better. And so with that, our core fundamental knowledge around what we do really enables that as well. Because what we want to do is we want to serve our clients, again, in this case, the internal stakeholders, and it's our knowledge and what we bring to the table as the procurement practitioners to be able to operate within that digital ecosystem. And so I wouldn't say, obviously learning the tools themselves and being able to operate, I would also is a fundamental thing, but that's table stakes, right? I think what we do with it and the vision that you see, that's why the vision and the roadmap, I think, is so important for the organization, is because you have to be able to follow that to be able to deliver to your clients in terms of what they're looking for, or your stakeholders from an internal standpoint.
Yeah, I found it's as much about how is the team positioned to take advantage of the outputs that the technology drives? Because you can have the technology which drives really wonderful outputs, but if you don't do anything with it, then there's no impact. So it's kind of that connection that's sometimes missing.
Yeah, it reminds me, actually, Alpar and I did a panel with one of our colleagues at a conference recently, and he made a really good point in terms of that often companies, they love the shiny objects, they play with a lot of the digital, he called it play with the toys, right? In terms of, but it's exactly to that point, Phil, in terms of you can have all of the tools in the world, but again, what is your output? What do you get from it? And then it poses a question, well, which digital tools actually stick in an organization? And I think Alpar really hit it. It solves a problem. It addresses a pain point. And so I think that's important. And that actually goes to the question, how do you know when to integrate that in? So if you start identifying it solves a problem, a pain point, then all of a sudden you're able to improve your own effectiveness in serving your stakeholders.
That's a great point about what's going to stick, because that's ultimately going to drive your ability to buy more. If you buy something that doesn't end up having adoption because it was either you picked the wrong part on the continuum to digitize at that moment in time, or you chose the wrong solution, then it can throw out your entire journey.
Or you picked it at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Timing is also very important. So I think all those things factor in for sure.
I want to transition to talking about aligning our digital transformations with the business. As we're looking, and Alpar, I'm going to ask this one to you first of all. As we're starting to pitch to the C-suite why investment in procurement digitization is important, what are some of the messages that you see resonating?
Well, it goes back to when you talk to the C-suite, it's all about ROI, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking for an investment, and I need to be able to translate it into a return to the business. Is it going to better manage my risk? Is it going to better track and allocate my financial resources? Is it going to help me identify the right third-party suppliers who's going to help me enable my overall corporate strategy and get to market faster? So is it about speed? Is it about cost? Is it about risk? So you have to define it in those terms of how is it going to change? Or is it going to allow me to retain my talent in the organization, my employees, and also leverage their time towards more value-added things by removing the friction, because they have to spend day and out on tasks that they shouldn't be spending time on. So I think you have to kind of define the value proposition of what is it going to do for the organization. And then I think the rest will follow for sure if you're good in putting that together.
And do you find typically the better approach is to go on an iterative journey where you're making smaller investments over time, or to go for I need this big check because I'm going to transform from end to end? Like, what do you see being, or is it very organizational specific?
No, I think, again, it goes back to one of the original previous questions about maturity. Don't jump the gun. Definitely. I think step by step is important. You have to, bite some, show the value, and then bite some more and show the value. I think it's a journey, to your point. This is not something that you're going to transform over the next 12 months and you're going to become this, frictionless, totally digitally enabled procurement function. Yeah. I think you got to pick your battles. That's why I said, if there's pain, if you understand the pain in the organization or the problem, you got to address that first. Leveraging, I'm sure that digital can play a role in that. You have to understand the role of digital in solving that problem, and then sell that first, and then go back and say, look, you gave me money on investment. I solved this problem, and here's all the happy, players in the ecosystem or the value that I created. Now my next 5 years look like this. I'm going to do this and this and this and that, and I'm going to come back to you every year showing what I've done with this investment. So I think that's really the journey and the vision that needs to be created. And
I imagine the faster you can provide speed to that value, the better. Yeah. It's not about, I remember back in the day seeing business cases that were, well, in 4 years' time, your ROI is going to be X, that actually everybody loses track of. And, that's never really measured. So it's as quickly as you can demonstrate what the ROI is against the business case that allows you to keep on going.
Time to money, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Phil, I was good. Sorry, Alpar, I mean to interrupt you there. I was going to come in and talk about, adoption is a critical element of that. It has to start with what Alpar is describing, that, again, back to, there has to be a clear vision. So what are we doing in the first place? That should indicate that there's real value in what we're trying to implement with this digital technology, and has a really strong role in driving towards our objectives in procurement, whether it's automation, whether it's analytics and bringing insights. So that's a key component of it. But we've seen in the data, you've seen some of the comments back from the folks on the LinkedIn there that, yes, the adoption is quite low in the realm of 30%. So why is that? Well, I think a big part of that is, as we've talked about already, there's maybe a lack of that clarity and vision up front that's driving it. And then a lack of the rest of the alignment across the ecosystem to drive that adoption. The way, once you have that, I think it comes down to wanting to make sure that that technology plays a natural role in what procurement is doing on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes that's not always the case. It's, hey, we brought in this great new technology. It's sitting off to the side. Hey, everybody, there it is. Go at it. Well, it's not integrated. It hasn't been thought through. It hasn't been well aligned to the needs of the ecosystem. And also recognizing that can change. You may have gotten started on a great program, have the perfect vision, have the ecosystem aligned in the budget, but things can change. We're working with a large consumer manufacturer. We're implementing a whole suite of technologies, a really ambitious program, very strong alignment, really clear vision where we're going, aligned across the stakeholders from a budget and support standpoint. But COVID hits. And, with the shift in resourcing and the resource movement, that obviously has an upset to your ecosystem. And it causes to step back and say, we need to let's go back. You don't just do that up front in considering the needs of your ecosystem. That's a dynamic situation. Things can change. IT could then be implementing another technology that we maybe weren't aware of that can change that initial plan and ecosystem. So the notion of adoption and ecosystem will change over time.
Yeah, which again, just thinking out loud here just came to me. Process by itself actually creates friction. Okay, so I've had several clients. One of them is a Fortune 50 company, right? And from a level of maturity, it was very, very, very immature to a point where, think about a Fortune 50 company where everybody can directly send, a request to a supplier. They just pay to invoice. There's no purchase orders. There's no reviews. There's no systems. There's no risk review. There's none of that, right? It's directly send me an invoice through this portal. I'll pay you, right? From that to just implementing a process of, no, you got to get a PO first. Well, no, you got to get a PR first, a requisition, then to a PO, and then to an invoice. Adds friction to it. So, okay, digital already comes with a process. So assume this company went from no process to, I'm going to pick the best of breed PR to PO and the pay solution in the market, and I implement that. What do you think people are going to think? No, I have to do all of that now, and the technology that I don't know. Okay, that's going to fail, right? But what they've done is they implemented the process first, which brought certain level of pain because it's different, it's change, right? But it's compliance. You have to do that, right? You're forced to the company. You can't not do it. But then there's pain, and then you bring technology to then reduce that and to remove the friction. Then it's adopted. So I think I've seen a lot of companies going directly to digital as if that's going to solve their problem, but I think you got to first define the process, bring some of that pain, and then bring that technology to solve it. Will be a little bit change management, one-on-one, in my opinion.
That's actually.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Actually, that's what I wanted to bring in to the conversation too. And actually just hit on it was around the change. And actually it goes back to the question, should you do it, a broad implementation or take it in bites? A big reason why you want to take it in bites is that when you implement tools, that change in itself is hard and it can be disruptive. Usually is disruptive. Having spent a big part of my career on the client side, how many of us have ever been through an ERP implementation, right? Everybody's like, oh gosh, okay. All right, roll your eyes, right? Those are it's very disruptive to the business. It's hard to get back on track. So if you do build on it as opposed to one big bang approach, that's less disruptive to the organization. And in my opinion, in my experience, allows it to stick a lot better because regardless, there's always going to be some element of disruption with the change, right?
Yeah. Again, ultimately goes back to it needs to simplify, the world and the ways of working for people, right? I mean, that's ultimately the role of technology, not to complicate it. If it's complicating it, it's too early. If it's complicating it, is not the right time, the right way to do it. So I think always thinks back, how does this going to help me solve my current day-to-day, activities and job and make me align my goals with what you're doing. So I think that really goes back to that.
I was going to risk showing myself as a real geek Alpar, by saying I interpret that as entropy, right? Entropy is a measure of disarray in a system or chaos. So the higher the entropy, the higher disarray. And all systems will go to a state of lower energy or higher chaos. If you're implementing digital, an important mental model is to think about, are you decreasing the entropy in the system? I think that's a geeky way to say what you just described, but maybe a good mental model as you're thinking about digital initiatives.
It's really interesting because, I mean, I've never really thought about it like that, but you're kind of creating a little bit of pain, but your solution therefore is to make the pain go away. And you almost have to create that pain before the solution is valued in the way that you want it to be valued. Let's see, what else do we have? I have a question, and Chris, I'm going to ask you this. This came from Cheng beforehand. The question is, so now if we are in an organization that has a level of digital maturity, then now thinking about, okay, what next? How do I go to the next level? I've got kind of the basics in place. What are some of your thoughts around category specific, bringing in category specific technology as part of that evolution? Is it something that brings in complexity and is difficult to get an ROI for, or actually it kind of makes sense now to how do we go further now that we've got the basics checked?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, certainly being grounded in the category management fundamentals, which is, hey, a good category strategy is category specific, right? You're assessing the business and the external market, and you're developing a long range category strategy that's unique to that category. And from a technology standpoint, there are foundational aspects to that, which I would say probably more organizations would focus on initially, and then layering on top of that the category specific dimensions to support the unique needs of the category. By foundational needs, I mean to develop a strategy and then execute that through the life cycle of procurement requires data, good understanding of data internally, your internal knowledge about best practices and what do we know internally, all of the external market intelligence, what's happening, what are the key drivers in the marketplace, what's going on with my existing project portfolio and my suppliers, understanding of how my suppliers are performing. So, there are general information that maps across categories. Certainly you slice that and bring that into the category dimension. But that's one area that we focused on in building a technology around the needs of category manager to bring in those aspects. So they're not chasing down, 50 different systems, but trying to bring as much of that we can to bear for the category managers to have at their fingertips to at least start at maybe the 50 to 80% of that base need, just to understand their categories, to understand what's needed to kind of focus on what areas to execute. So that's, I would say, to me, that's where I would see the most organizations would benefit by focusing on first before then layering on maybe a category specific layer.
Yeah, and then those category specific layers like sourcing optimization, for example, for complex transportation lanes, or there's some very specific solutions related to whether it's MRO or facilities, and start to look at those lines, but get your fundamentals right first. Let's see, Julie, I have a question from Jenny, and we've actually just got probably 5 minutes or so left. So if there is any last questions, please feel free to pop them in. And if we do have any time at the end, I will ask one or two of them. But Julie, we had a question from Jenny that says, we've talked about procurement. We've talked about like supercharging the digital strategy around procurement and how we can support the business, but it's been around the procurement process. How do you think about how our strategies from a digitization perspective can support things like risk management, supply diversity, sustainability, some more kind of enterprise-wide initiatives?
Yes. Well, actually, I think Chris really touched on it in terms of, because that's very specific in terms of gathering the data. And I think that a strategy around that and understanding what's out there in the market to be able to enable and give you that information, to be able to not only understand it from an enterprise standpoint, but bringing it back to what we deliver to our clients or our internal stakeholders. It's very important. So oftentimes, again, we have been talking about procurement, but diversity, risk management. Obviously, they're such an integral part of what we do from a procurement standpoint. You have to integrate that as a part of your strategy. You have to integrate that as a part of your roadmap. And so you should not, I mean, we're talking about if you should not just focus on the procurement process, because then we've siloed ourselves if we haven't thought about it from an enterprise-wide standpoint. So I think it absolutely has to be a part of the larger roadmap. You can't forget it.
Okay, so let's see. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. I have one that I'm going to go around the table for, and this can be the last question. So we probably have a minute or so to each to answer this one. We've talked about today supercharging our digital procurement strategy. So, how do we accelerate what we do? How do we have a greater impact in what we can deliver through digital strategies in support of the procurement ecosystem? Let's flip that. What slows us down? Alpar, I'm going to ask you that first. Like, what are the things that you see that actually inhibit us to developing, implementing digital strategies that support what the business needs?
I'm just going to say people.
Yeah.
We are our own enemy in terms of, being skeptical, slow to adopt, or being too bullish or too aggressive. Again, it goes back to figure out what needs to be, implemented now, what needs to be adopted now. There's so many great technologies out there. I mean, it's out there. But it's like figuring out what one makes sense now and where to start. And that's where the art comes out. We're talking about art of procurement. It's really an art. It's not a science. I mean, the science is already there. Figuring it out and making it stick and making it valuable is an art. So I think that's my recommendation and suggestions to everybody listening to this, is that it starts with you and with us, is like figuring out what's needed and then and going with it.
Thanks. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Yeah, if I just build on that, it would be, well, first of all, digital itself should not be the objective. We've talked about that already. But I'd build on what Alpar says, and I think one of the little secrets of digital transformation is that, the true essence of it is the expertise, is the practitioner level understanding. So this audience, procurement practitioners, what to do, right? And that's the most important part. Yeah, there's all kind of neat technologies. It's really, really neat what's kind of building and developing. But you can get a lot of help on how to approach that. Knowing what to do, knowing where the problems and pain points are, and where value is going to be driven is always the starting point.
And Julie, I'm not sure either. I've made it harder for you because Alpar and Chris have come up with the answers, or giving you a little bit more time to think about it. Julie, what's your perspective?
So as humans, we oftentimes are adverse to change. I was talking about change just before now. And I think if I add on to the people element, not everyone likes to operate within technology either. Right. I've joked many times within our own business that I'm the least technology able, right, in terms of being able to describe something. And that's really not necessarily the case, but technology and adoption and wanting to even operate and change the way you normally do things, not everyone moves into that easily. And so, what Alpar said in terms of, okay, it starts with us as humans. Well, as procurement practitioners, we have a way that we do things. There's a way that we, in our case, service our clients, run our processes, et cetera. To be able to shift to that doesn't come easily to everyone. So I think, first of all, you have to recognize that, and then be able and be open-minded to the change, because what does that bring forth? How does it make your role better? How does it make your deliverable better? And I think if you put it in that perspective and you're open to learning new things, because what you're doing is you're really learning a new technology, if you will, to make what you're doing better. And so I think if you think about it that way, then that would be my recommendation to put it in that context. And then the implementation goes, I think a bit smoother.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that. I see that change management for a lot of companies when they're going on a transformation journey of any kind, but also specifically digital transformation journey, communications and change management is underinvested. and perhaps other areas are maybe overinvested, and that leads to more issues. Then the change management probably is as important as the selection of the tool that you're going to use in the first place.
Yeah.
So I know it's time for us to wrap up. Julie, Alpar, and Chris, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and for everybody who joined us on the webinar. Really appreciate it. If you missed any of today's webinar, it will be available on demand through this same platform that you watched on pretty shortly. If anybody else that you think might benefit and value from watching the webinar, then you can direct them there and they can watch this again on demand. So with that all being said, I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.